Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, and today I have for you an interesting little video about the Circle 2 synth by FAW. Future Audio Workshop, I think is what that stands for. Anyway, this is Circle 2. There apparently was a Circle 1, but I have never used it. I actually hadn't heard of these guys before, but they reached out for me. They had just finished making Circle 2. It's actually going to be out tomorrow, I think. And they were kind enough to give to me a free version for me to mess around with and do this video for. I actually think it's kind of cool. It does some neat things, and I'll kind of give you an overview about what it does and what I think it's sort of good for. And yeah, this costs $129 USD. Anyway, this is I hit the new button. This isn't actually the first thing that pops up when you open the thing. It's some preset that's kind of neat, shows up. And what this is, this first guy that shows up here is that, like, if you kind of look at it, you can sort of get the gist if you're sort of familiar with VSTs in general and plugins and synthesis. That, like, you know, we got your oscillators over here complete with noise and feedback. You have a mixer, some filters, and other effects modules, and then we have controls over here, envelope, LFO, that kind of thing. These, however, you could make them be all the same thing. You can see that they're all envelope or either LFO sequencers or envelopes, and you can make them all one or the other. Same thing with the modules in here. We have filter or dual filter, or we have these particular units, and then we have a post version of these particular units, post filter, and then we have the VCA, which is the voltage controlled amplifier. See, I think the point of this is that it's about a more analog approach or sounding thing. I'm not 100% sure about that. Well, that's what VCA stands for. You might have seen the term VA before. VA stands for virtual analog, and VC stands for voltage controlled. So VCO, voltage controlled oscillator, VCF, voltage controlled filter, that kind of thing. That's how analog works, and especially the modular world. There's a lot of that floating around. But then we have this VPS. What the hell does that stand for? That stands for Vector Phase Shifting Synthesis. I think synthesis is the one. I could check that. Probably smart if I did. I did check it recently. That's why I know that. All right. So what does that do? I'm not 100% sure, but it has to do with it's like a particular kind of way of approaching sine waves. It sounds a little bit like additive, like a bit of an additive process. But the control they give you over it, I mean, you got your coarse and your fine control. Clicking will change it. Double clicking will reset most parameters, so it's nice. And then we have horizontal and vertical, which I have this EQ open so we can look at precisely what it's doing. I'm going to get rid of this envelope, which is by default attached to the VCA. You can see how the green button, and then we have the green thing over here. You can control the depth of that. And that works for a lot of stuff. We'll get into the modulation in a second. Listen to this for a second. See how it kind of does that? Like, it kind of wobbles a little bit when you do slow modulation. That's a little bit what it sounds like when you do FM, and also some particular kinds of wavetable processing. So I'm curious as to what exactly is happening under the hood. In the design, in the press doc, they actually talk about that this process, this VPS business, was actually developed in some college somewhere. So that there might actually be more information about that. I might do some research because it sounds like a neat idea. It might just be on this, but we'll find out. It'll be interesting. I like new things. Oh, anyway, the oscillator is pretty cool. It's pretty much what it's got. You got controls over it, and as you apply it to certain things, it can be pretty neat. And what do I mean by apply to certain things? Let's talk about the modulation capabilities of the synth for a second. By default, we have this one envelope that's attached to the VCA, which you saw that I kind of just stopped using. And then we also have this guy, the keyboard 1, attached to the pitch. And if I actually didn't have that there would be no pitch change whatsoever for the keyboard, for playing it. So you might be thinking, well, cool, that means I can attach things like the LFOs and the envelopes or whatever to that, but you can also attach other oscillators, which is pretty cool. When you turn on a second oscillator, it first pops up as showing up in the mixer, which makes sense. You can turn this off in the mixer. That's what I was doing for this particular experiment where I am now going to link that oscillator to the pitch. Suddenly FM. It's kind of a limited FM. You can see that it's doing it. Like if I were to turn this really high up and this really down low, you can see that it's really doing it, and you can control it. Doing something like this to the VPS or using it by the VPS, because you can also do the opposite. I could control it sideways with the VPS, but that'd be kind of weird. And it's because the VPS is not all there. It's not super well, like, perfect, which I have to imagine is intentional because this is supposed to be an analog sort of feely deal. And that's one big point of analog, is that nothing is really all that well controlled. But if I were to make this analog, just normal like waveform, we can see the FM doing this thing. The FM is not nearly as powerful in terms of like usability or literally in terms of amplitude as other synths before them, but you can do stuff like layer them, have more than one of the same. And do cool stuff like that. I'm not particularly a fan of the distortion availability in this plugin, but I mean, you can just use external stuff for that, whatever. Also, a cool thing is the ring modulator, and it works just like a normal ring modulator, except that we have to consider the synth's strengths when we're talking about it, and one of its strengths is its modulation capabilities. Let's see if right now, when I play this note, I get that cool kind of modulation, but if I were to play any other note, it doesn't maintain that particular feel. But if I link the keyboard tracking to the ring modulator, it keeps it going, which is pretty nice. And you can apply that to a lot of stuff. I could also, even if I wanted to, I could link an oscillator's FM onto, which can be kind of weird. Or I can link it to a mount instead of which will do weird things. Note that when I go to the square or triangle section, that there is a pulse width mod thing that shows up in the analog section. The other oscillator type is the wavetable oscillator. And this is a pretty basic wavetable application. It's essentially you have two waveforms and you can modulate between the two waveforms. That's basically it. However, when we link when we consider these actions, with other particular, its strengths, like having FM on that oscillator, which I like doing. I can also put on an LFO on top of that. I put it on pitch. I didn't even put it on the. And we have the rate over here, which by default is linked to just pure speed and not linked to BPM syncing, but you can turn on sync and you can link it. Pretty straightforward. Also have the level, which is sort of the application amount, but you can also control the application amount over here. So we have multiple ways of controlling that. You essentially have the same sort of interface that Massive does when it comes to picking out modulation shape, and then you can fade between the two shapes and that kind of thing. You have fade in, you have delay, and you can also modulate the shape fading with either another LFO or one of the oscillators, any of the modulation sources. And if I were to not sync it and have regular rate control, I could also link this to the keyboard. and I could do the Reese kind of control where it goes faster or higher, slower and lower, that kind of thing. Lots of neat control with that. Now that brings me to sort of like what I think that this synth's power is, and it's this kind of stuff. This sort of base level control with not just oscillator linking, like FM on things like filter. You can also do filter FM, which I didn't even talk about. Yeah, let's talk about filter FM. But you notice how if you go too fast, it kind of stops being super apparent. And this is a limitation that's present in just about any kind of digital implementation of non-oscillator FM. Because normal digital FM is not direct FM. It's not like the pitch is controlling the pitch of the other oscillator as if it were just an LFO, like it would be in the analog world. It's phase modulation, which is a different kind of process that they do because there's some kind of digital limitation about just direct pitch control. I don't know what that is, but it exists. And this sort of speed limitation is present on most things. You can tell that, you can see, like, when you have an LFO on some things, you might notice that they don't really go that fast. This one's maximum base rate is 30 hertz, which is barely a bass tone. And you might notice that while you could tell at higher speeds when they're not quite, harmonic. You can tell that they're doing it. I can tell you from experience that actual analog filter FM doesn't behave like that. And that's that's just sort of, whoa, that's just sort of it's. An unfortunate digital limitation. But as far as that goes, this is one of the first things I've seen that actually managed to implement it well enough that I can actually use it. It's not the first thing I've seen to actually implement it, because obviously, Massive has filter FM built in. That has particular limitations as well. Other things, like I know that stuff like Reactor exists, and also FL's Synthmaker or Flowstone, whatever they call it now. You can do this kind of oscillator linking in a particular kind of hacky way. But the problem with that is that those things are essentially coding environments and not synths. They're not designed to be used well enough, or they're especially not designed to have any kind of. They're designed for you to do what you know how to do if you know how to do it, and which is fine. That's the thing. But this synth actually puts that in there in a way that's pretty straightforward and presentable, which is pretty neat. I wish that my only real gripes about this is that, like, I wish it were a little harsher with the FM, especially the non-oscillator based FM. I wish it would, like, be a little more obvious, be a bit sharper, that kind of thing. I mean, it might be able to be, like, using saw waves for things can kind of be, or like square waves and that kind of thing, can be kind of weird for FM. Like, if you do a really slow version of like the analog saw or square, you might notice that it's not really quite perfect. And that has a lot to do with, I think, their idea of what it means to have like what analog means, that kind of thing. Because if I were to actually, let's make this a sine wave. Let's make it kind of high pitched, and then see now this. I'm essentially ring modulating in it right now. And it's a little bit weird, and it's still doing it. And like part of the sort of the glory of the analog world is that you really don't know what's happening a lot of times. I mean, you can know, obviously, but it's a little bit more unknowable than sort of your digital perfection kind of thing. And as far as creativity goes, that's pretty awesome, because that means that stuff that you weren't prepared to happen ends up happening, which gives you ideas you never would have had if you were actually doing what you meant to do. And I understand that as a sort of a creativity tool, which I personally don't subscribe to, but I know that a lot of people do. And this synth delivers that in spades. Like, that's kind of its deal. and such. So, I mean, while I was messing around with it before, with not necessarily what I'm doing now, you might have heard some pretty cool things about it, like cool things happening. And you can use this for some pretty traditional stuff. In fact, the thing is chock full of presets and things that work out pretty well. I just have tools that I like better at my disposal for that particular thing. But where this thing shines is the very particular, very interesting modulation paths and oscillator rate modulation of things that you wouldn't normally do. And that's a thing that's not really available on a lot of plugins. So that has a power. Like it's kind of like, you know, when I think about Serum, for example, Serum as a plugin can do a lot of stuff. It can be your main driver. It can be the thing that you can do everything with, but it has a particular strength that nothing else has, and that's its wavetable creation abilities. So for this synth, I'm pretty sure you could use it to do a lot of your normal daily driver stuff, but I have other things that can do other stuff better. But this does have stuff, like I said, in the modulation capabilities that nothing else can do. So it does have value in that regard that I like. I came to the settings tab because this is where the unison lives. And you can have up to 32 voices of unison, which is loud as fuck. That didn't help. VCA. Whew. Still not helping. Master. There we go. It has a pretty good detuned spread, which is nice. Like I'm just using the normal saw right now. And that sounds pretty okay. Notice that it freaked out just then, and that wasn't the synth sounding like that. That was my CPU freaking out because I am doing 32 voices of this oscillator synced. Notice how it works a little bit better when I'm not doing 32 voices. Like I said, the whole digital control of oscillator rate modulation is something that I guess there's some kind of limitation for. It's very process intensive. So doing a lot of that will be kind of a big deal. And as many of you may know, I have a ridiculous computer. There's also an effects section. There's 3 of them. I believe they're just in series with each other. And they just various different effects. Pretty regular stuff. The bucket delay is kind of nice. Pretty cool effect there, and some look, tube distortion. I like that a lot better than I like the distortions built into here, which I guess that makes sense that the harsher distortion would be at the end like this, like most plugins that I like, in the phasers and that kind of thing. There is also a feedback down here. Could do some cool stuff with that. It also shows up in the mixer along with the noise oscillator, which is just straight out noise. It's white noise, nothing really complicated about that. Although notice that you can link this to stuff, which means that you can use noise as a modulation source to things, which could be cool for very interesting randomness business. Yeah. So that, I think, is a good sort of introductory look at this kind of thing. I actually kind of like this thing. I might experiment around with some of this oscillator stuff in the VPS business. I think that might be a very interesting modulation source as well. I've only had this thing for a couple of hours, but that's sort of its beauty, is that it is very visibly simple. It's like what you're looking at is what's happening, and there's not a lot of like hidden things. Like there's the effects stuff over here. There's some control routing for different modulation and that kind of thing for like MIDI and whatever. And then the settings, like there's this gigantic randomize panel where you can tell what to randomize and how much randomization you have. And this is not performance randomization. This is preset randomization where it'll change parameters, including things like the sources. So you can do some cool stuff with that. I know that most analog heads are really big in the randomness, so there you go. Beep boop. Sorry. And this is, of course, where the detune and the unison lives. In the keyboard setting, this is sort of where you control what the keyboards, like the keyboard mapping does. You have keyboard 1, keyboard 2, and velocity. You can change what that means, what they do. Also, they can have independent glide, which is kind of nice. So you can link straight up keyboard pitch for what you're doing, and then you can have keyboard 2 and then glide into parameters when you move them around, which is really neat. You can actually have different oscillators have glide while other oscillators do not have glide. That's pretty cool. There's also an arpeggiator built in. Kind of cool that there's swing built into that. And then there's the little browser window for presets, and where you can also save your own presets. It's kind of like I'm reminded a bit of Massive and other Native Instruments plugins that have their own similar sort of thing. I like how there's a years-based thing here. It's pretty sweet. This is a pretty great, very specific thing in terms of being the whole analog feel, which I'm not, as far as the digital world goes, I'm not really that into like analog sort of recreations, except for when they actually do things that analog's good for. I'm not into the whole idea of it being like, it sounds warmer, it's random, and those sorts of things. I if you know anything about me, you know that I like to have control over what I'm doing. And like the one thing that analog can do still that digital cannot is perfect oscillator level, like audio rate modulation. Like in regular modular analog stuff, you can just plug an oscillator into literally anything that has a CV input, which is most things, and you can oscillate that stuff at that fast. And one of the things that it's super great for is making Reeses, because the whole idea of like, if I have a saw wave, and I modulate, I keep the filter in there, and like I modulate the filter to another oscillator. If I'm off a little bit, you get rhythmic movement of that, because the pitches are different. You get phase cancellation of the signals, and then you get some movement over there, which is higher as you go lower, faster as you go higher, slower as you go lower. And you can, like, if in the analog world, like in the last sample pack I put out a bunch of analog sounds in there that I recorded when I was in Cell Dweller Studio, and a lot of that was just like a chains of different oscillator level audio rate FM that resulted in just that stuff happening. And you can actually do a little bit of that inside this plugin, which I think is really cool. I will maybe do some more tutorials about this if I can come up with some cool stuff to do with it. Mostly I think I'll just this will be my niche and interesting plugin for me personally. I know that a lot of people will probably like this a lot, because it definitely does sort of foster creativity, analog sort of esque randomness and that kind of thing. And that's a lot of people who use this, synthesizers like that in them. It also has a gigantic amount of presets, so good times. So this was developed by, oh, look at that. There's my code. You can't use it because it's already activated. Here's all the people that developed it. Neat. Future Audio Workshop. So I was right about that. Awesome. How do I get rid of this? This is okay. There it is. Nice. So yeah, if you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.